Well, let's ask about this other part of it here then, that from Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, who said it can't be reformed because, as you point out, people are in the streets demanding change, and change is ultimately how we get to a point where this doesn't happen again. But we've seen reform in the way of police departments banning chokeholds and banning no-knock warrants. Isn't reform how we get to a better place here?
Donlin, that's the million-dollar question, and one that I'm certainly not qualified to answer. I'm not closest to the problem, therefore I won't be closest to the solution. But what I will say is that the police system was built in this country to specifically police the enslaved when they were fleeing the plantations. That message and those actions and that behavior is the foundation for what law enforcement in this country was built upon. And it's silly for us and irresponsible and frankly lazy of us to pretend like there aren't traces of that still today when we see Black and brown, particularly men, being arrested and sentenced at 20 times the rate of other white folks. And oftentimes, and I've been on the receiving end of this for the past 24 hours in a pretty intense way, where people will make statements like, oh, well, isn't there more crime in urban communities? Or, you know, he shouldn't have resisted arrest, or she was confused. And none of those nuances make any sense or matter at this point when you have a system that is meant to protect the American public very much consistently taking the lives of Black men, unarmed Black men, for having Skittles in their pocket, for maybe paying with a fake $20 bill, as I'm referencing George Floyd in that same city, or in this case with Dante Wright, who had an air freshener. I mean, the real question is, why was he pulled over to begin with? There are white women who are constantly, you know, we just saw one recently kicking over, you know, merchandise in a Starbucks store because she refuses to wear a mask. Yet he is scared for his life, calls his mom because he knows, we all know what happens when Black men come face to face with law enforcement, because he's scared for his life. You tell me what you would do.
Well, what would we do? Should we get rid of police, as the Congresswoman suggests? I mean, as she put it in writing, I'm not sure if she meant like literally getting rid of all policing and incarceration, do you think?
Well, I know that can sound really intimidating because there's this sudden like, well, who do I call in an emergency? But I do think there's something very responsible and incredibly overdue for all of us as citizens to lean into this idea of how can we reallocate state and federal funding to support our communities differently? Because if there's a domestic dispute, does it make sense for armed police officers to show up? If there is somebody having a mental breakdown, does it make sense for armed officers to show up? You know, this idea that there are professionals and other fellow Americans who are very qualified and very willing to step into complicated conversations, but the first, or complicated situations, I should say, but the first person to pick up the phone are police officers. So what if you shaved corners of the law enforcement budget and reallocated them to mental support, or reallocated them to different expertise and specialties that might sort of handle situations that don't end up risking the lives of innocent, unarmed human beings.
No, I get that, Jenna, and I do. And I agree that we do need to look at different ways to police. But I think there are cities that have already done it and moved money away from their police departments.
You know what? With all due respect, we are in not even the first quarter of what that could look like. You know, I know cities immediately after George Floyd's murder raised their hand and committed to that, but that was pulling out, you know, metal detectors out of high schools. Just because you pull out metal detectors out of education systems or education spaces, it doesn't necessarily mean that the job is done. We are sitting on 400 years of a very intentionally racist system. Now, that's not to say some of the most important people who have shown up on my doorstep or in circumstances of emergency were badge-carrying human beings, and I'm grateful for that service. But to act like we have tried and it didn't work is a really easy way of not continuing to ask the hard questions. What we know is not working, and we have to come up with better solutions. And so let's continue to follow the lead of people who have some really good ideas on that.
That sounds great, and it's a great way for us to end. Jenna, it's been an interesting conversation. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.